Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the latest in a series of OwnCloud webinars about, well, OwnCloud. We're going to start in a couple of minutes with the core content, but the first thing I want to make sure is that folks can hear me. So if guys are out, if you're out there and you're in the interface and you could send us a text and just let us know that the audio is working, that'd be fantastic. It's a webinar without audio is, well, not that useful. Okay. We'll keep an eye open for that. Perfect. Good. Seeing some comments come in. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. As you see in the questions area, please feel free. Hello, Chicago. Please feel free to add in your questions. We'll be answering them as we go. And if we don't have time or find ourselves running a little long, we will answer them at the end and or make sure we reach out to you with answers to your question. So having said that, let's jump right into the webinar. So hi, my name is Matt Richards. I'm the VP of Products for OwnCloud. And today I wanted to talk to you about, honestly, security management, encryption, cloud-based file sync and share, and some of the ways you can protect yourself against some of the dangers or some of the issues of these services. And I just have to say as an aside, hello to the Bahamas as well, because I'd really like to be there. I hope it's nice and sunny. Okay, slide number one, just digging into the problem or into the question. We're going to talk a little bit about how we lost control with file sync and share in the enterprise, some of the challenges with trying to solve that with a purely cloud or a cloud-based solution, and then how we go around solving some of those for you. And then we'll take questions at the end. So first off, I'm sure you guys know what Dropbox is all about. You're here, so you've probably played with Dropbox or an equivalent. We have essentially a problem was created for the enterprise, and it really wasn't intended to be a problem. It was intended to be a way for end users to be able to share files better, and initially on campus as students, and then eventually it became the Dropbox we love today. And the reason it became so popular is, look, it's simple, it's free, it's easy to obtain, it's easy to use, and honestly, it just works. And the challenge is there's also a network effect as more and more people sign up. More and more folks find value in it, and inevitably, Dropbox finds its way to work. Or some other service. I don't mean to pick on Dropbox. Some other consumer cloud service finds its way to work, and of course it just works, but mostly around, it mostly works around the idea of security. You're trading off access and ease of use with security and control, and that's a real problem for the enterprise. And really, it's very simple. User A and user B wanted to share a file, but it was too big for email. There's a bunch of ways they can solve it, but to be honest, this whole Dropbox thing is really easy. Get yourself Google Docs, Dropbox, whatever it is, drop your file in it, share it with user B, now you're done. The problem is, as with me, I'm not being malicious, but when I left previous employments, I had still all the Dropbox files syncing to my PC, even though I was no longer with the company. And that is one way to ensure that sensitive data in one use case gets out. So, why is this a bad thing? Let's just take a second and think about that. When you lose control of sensitive data, bad things happen. Now, this is a recent study from Ponema and Symantec. They do this every year. And it's been pretty flat these last couple of years around the estimated cost of a data breach in the US at about $5.4 million. And honestly, there's a lot of intangibles associated with it. Yeah, okay, so there's a fine, there's legal risk, lawsuits, legal action. You have all sorts of regulatory issues. Some of it, though, is in intangibles. It's about customer or partner trust. It's about your brand image. Yeah, okay, so audits and business reputation, all of those things combined make losing control of sensitive data a bad thing. And honestly, it's not necessarily that you had a breach, because there are plenty of cases where regulatory organizations around the world find somebody, healthcare, for example, and HIPAA in the United States, find somebody millions of dollars not because there was a breach, but because there was simply a loss of control of the data. A perfect example, a HIPAA hospital was using a Google Doc spreadsheet to track patient admissions to the hospital. Fantastic idea, great way to be efficient, certainly no evil intent, and certainly no hack of Google Docs, but that data was now out in the public domain for all, and from a regulatory standpoint, led to action against that organization. So to avoid this, what do you got to do? Well, as an IT manager, a couple things you got to think about. You want to think about, and we'll talk about these in the next few pages. The hardware, the network and the storage. Where is it? What is it? How do you access it? Who has control over it? Then you want to think about administering users and admins themselves, and who are they? Who do they work for? What policies and what compliance mechanisms are in place to oversee all that? Then, how do you integrate with what you already have in terms of your IT environment? And last but not least, the regulatory impacts and the ability to demonstrate compliance with an ownership of data as it relates to regulations around the world. And so that's what we're going to run through real quick. So first and foremost, here's some questions that cloud vendors in general don't answer that well. And some of them answer them quite well, so certainly not. This is just a good list of questions to ask. For example, right, where is the hardware and who has access? Is there a USB port in the hardware? Can I plug in a USB stick? Can someone walk in and grab data, encrypted or not? Can someone grab a hard drive? Do you have access, physical access to the servers? I think this is somewhat clear, and for those of you who know physical security reasonably well, it's no new news here, but I'll tell you a story to bring the point home. I used to work with a financial services company in IT, and we were doing some development work of an online allocation system for financial transactions around 401ks and things like that. And one day we were working along, and the server went down, and we could not for the life of us figure out what happened. Couldn't find it. And by the end of the day, 5, 6 o'clock, it came back online, got plugged back into the wall, back into the network, and all of a sudden it was back. What we didn't realize is that that server had been borrowed because they needed a prop to film a commercial. So, access to hardware, clearly important. Do you know if that access to hardware complies with your policies and your requirements and your service levels agreements that you have with your customers? Got to make sure it all stacks up. Okay, network control. Same sort of conversation or comment. Where is the network? How is it routed? Where are the endpoints? Who has access? In all honesty, it comes down to who can plug into it, what levels of assurance do you have that it's being monitored to your standards, that if there's an issue, you get notified, and that you can take action. And one here that's often not well understood is the whole conversation around CDNs, content delivery networks. And depending on the content delivery network, if you're using the cloud service to sync and share files around the world, it is entirely possible that that CDN sits in the middle, and there has to be some SSL magic, which may lead you to an unencrypted set of files at yet a third party associated with the content distribution network. That then, if you back that up a little bit, that means that you now have a third party where you have to ask all these same questions about all over again, and very often those third parties aren't listed when you start working with these customers. So who are they and where are the files, and is it possible for those to be accessed at any point when they're unencrypted? And it's not that a breach has to happen for a risk to occur. It simply has to be that you aren't sure what the answer is, and that's sometimes enough to get you in trouble. So let's talk about storage. This is where it starts to get interesting. If you're working with a cloud service, who owns the data? And depending on the service, that data may no longer be yours according to the user license agreements that you click through when you first log in. So that's the first one. The second one, when a file gets there and it's, quote, encrypted end-to-end, typically that means SSL to the servers wherever they might be, and then some back-end magic where they're encrypted at rest. And in the middle, there's an application layer there that does the translation, and it may or may not be accessed. If, in fact, it is accessed, which I know some of these vendors do, in fact, access for scanning or deduplication purposes, a file, that's potentially not legal in certain jurisdictions in certain countries with certain types of files. So you got to make sure you know exactly whether or not those files are being scanned. Another one that's pretty popular in here is the whole government asking for your data in the U.S. So the government walks up to a service provider who's hosting this data and says, hey, can I have it? They're obligated to give it to them. Whereas if it's your data, that obligation is subject to a warrant, which requires a certain level of approvals and safeguards. A couple other things on key management, right? Who has the keys, who can actually see and access and decrypt the files, even if they are encrypted at rest. That can be a big issue. A lot of admins have access to the files at third parties without all that trouble. And if they chose to be malicious, or even not malicious, but in doing something that seemed perfectly ordinary, ended up compromising your data, therein is a problem. What happens to when you delete your files, right? Deduplication. Look, if the file's out there in the cloud and you delete it, it's entirely possible with certain deduplication going on that those files are not actually deleted, but that components of those files sit around. And that's something else just to make sure you know, because it can just be enough that a part of a file remains out there for you to be in breach. So do you know where your data lives? User and admin controls the next one. This is about provisioning and authentication. When someone leaves the company, are they deprovisioned? Is that inside your control? Can you deprovision them? Is there SSO associated with it, SAML or something, or are you using internal access controls like LDAP or Active Directory? Honestly, whose policies are associated with that? How are the users tracked? How are they audited? Can you get access to the logs, incorporate those logs into your tools, and then set alerts so your admins are notified that there's something wrong? Or is this something that you depend on the service provider to provide? And in some cases, allowing somebody else to do it, if they're not doing it to your standards, is going to be a problem for you in the long run, especially if there's an audit. And there's always, of course, the question about whether or not the administrators are trained to your policies. And one of the challenges with service providers is not that they don't train their personnel well, but it's a one-size-fits-all scenario. And if you have a unique need on any of these subjects, storage, networks, server usage, and admin control, if you have a unique need, chances are that's, if it's outside that, the need of and the ability of the service provider to configure that option, you're done. You can't have it. So, important to understand who's using your data, who's accessing your data, and how. The last, there's a couple more items here. Integration, one of them. Integration, how does what you're doing in the cloud integrate? To be honest, you have spent, as an IT administrator or as an IT manager, years building out an organization and a structure inside the company that meets regulatory compliance requirements, that ensures certain retention policies are met, that ensures that files are truly deleted when they're deleted, and assures that your policies are met. If you can't integrate and leverage some of those solutions, a lot of those investments become wasted, and you end up with yet a new silo of data. The ideal scenario is one where you can actually integrate something with the infrastructure that you already have in place. And if to do that you have to open a nice big hole in your firewall to let these pieces through, that's not necessarily the best approach, although it is a possible approach. And there's always going to be something you can't let out. There's always then going to be a separation between this cloud service and what you're trying to do internally, and the tools you're using internally and the tools you're using in the cloud service, etc. So, lots to think about in terms of integration and how you leverage your existing infrastructure. The regulatory piece, look, do you know where it resides? This is that very important one about sensitive data. Do you comply with the law? Do you know where the data resides? Do you know where it was at all times? Was it ever outside of something in your control? That loss of control for even a limited period of time on any given file can cost you in an audit. And it has cost folks in the U.S., and I'm thinking specifically around examples around HIPAA compliance. There are many, many, many conversations out there around PRISM. Once you're working with a service provider, there is, depending on the stories and the conversations and the belief of what PRISM is capable of, there are a number of potential risks when you put your data into a service provider that's outside of your own ownership. Are you able to comply with data protection laws? And honestly, in the end, can you prove that you're in control? You can prove you were in control and that you know where everything was at all times, and you can demonstrate who was using it to do what. In most cases, you're in good shape. If you can't do that, you have trouble. So, just to summarize the whole thing, for sensitive corporate data, we believe very strongly that data has to be in your control. My opinion, and our opinion is there's a lot of need for leveraging your infrastructure and storage with admins that you know and that you train. That's data that has to be owned by you. And if that data is not owned by you, you've given up a significant corporate asset. That data has to be thoroughly auditable, right? You need to have audit logs that prove what files went where and who did what with them, so that there is no doubt, if and when an audit comes in for your sensitive data, that you were in control at all times. And last, easy to use, something that appears to the end users, to those folks out there who are sharing this corporate data, like a consumer service. And so if we were to summarize the first part of this webinar, it's really about these 4 items. So let's talk quickly about what we see as the solution to this problem, because it's no fun to tee up a problem and then not give a solution. If you look at this is very similar to the early problem. User A shares a file with user B, but in this case, instead of going out to the cloud, that little gray-blue puffy cloud there in the middle, that's a server running in your data center or wherever you choose to put it, behind your firewall. What was once completely uncontrolled is now controlled by IT. Storage and servers, security governance, integration with existing systems, integration with existing database standards, logging modules, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And still giving that consumer-grade ease of use on mobile platforms, desktop platforms, and also through the web. So what does that mean? Well, OwnCloud here, we help enterprises who care about these sorts of things, about losing sensitive data to the cloud, with a secure file sync and share, i.e. a secure self-hosted Dropbox, on storage inside your data center. And it's on site or where you choose, and that's important, because where you choose to put this is where you choose to put your other things, other systems, other servers that you're running in the enterprise. They're subject to exactly the same IT infrastructure integration, which you can now do because you're running your servers inside your IT environment, integrated in with single sign-on, LDAP or Active Directory. We talked about log managers, back-end storage, Windows home directories, and CIFS shared directories, and object stores, or whatever you might have. Integrate in with all of that and leverage it, and do so in a way that's extremely extensible. So don't have SAML today, but may want to shift to it in the future. Start with the LDAP and Active Directory plugin, and then over time, swap over to the SAML plugin. Right, and then start authenticating that way. And still, at the same time, providing that seamless, easy-to-use access to access to sensitive data that your users expect from consumer-grade service. So what's that mean? Well, it means there's 3 parts to OwnCloud. First, the server, we like to call it the brains. It sits on a web server. It's an N-tier web-based app. You can scale it horizontally. You can scale it vertically. You add storage on the back end, and you connect it to the database, and it does the primary thinking for OwnCloud. And then you access it from any iOS or Android device, or any WebDAV client, to be honest, on mobile, on desktop. And then Windows, Mac, and Linux desktop file sync clients, which give you that synced directory from the server to your desktop, so that when you're offline, you can just shut your PC, get on the airplane, and continue to work. When you get back online, it'll automatically sync the latest files up to the server or down from the server. So did we go through those same questions again, right? Where your hardware is. Do you know where it is? Well, yeah, in this case, the way we're talking about here, we're talking about using your administrators, your policies, and your procedures. You're talking about your access restrictions, your controls, your access controls, your logs. The corporate data you're talking about is already protected in your environment. Might as well take advantage of it and leverage it and work from it rather than get rid of it and bypass it. Do you know where your data goes? Of course, it's your network. It's your routing rules. It's your access to the routers. It's your configurations, intrusion detection. You have gold master standards of things, routers, operating systems. Use them. Use your certificates on your network. Where does it live? Well, now it's your storage, running where you choose to put it, alongside the other storage for your enterprise. So only your employees have access. It's retained. Sometimes there's retention requirements. It's retained to the specifications you need. It's backed up as necessary by your requirements, and it's safely out of the reach without a subpoena. To be honest, it's your data. And do you know who uses your data? Right? It's the admins managing your users, managing to policies and procedures. logged into your servers with keys managed by you. Integrating in with your data, well, that's very simple. Add files, backend file storage systems, and you don't have to create a big hole in your firewall and through your DMZ and into your infrastructure to share something on the web. You have web ports open to the web for mobile access that have your proxy servers in use, your DNS servers in use, your certificates, and you can, as you're running in the firewall, you can leverage the file storage you already have. You can leverage the authentication mechanisms you already have, log managers, intrusion protection, virus scanning, DLP, and much, much, much more, because you've already figured out the problem and how to comply and how to protect this data. The best bet is to leverage what you've already figured out, not create it anew with an offsite scenario. And of course, do you comply with the law? Yes, because you have audits. Your CIO and your CFO and your CSO, or fill in the role here, right, has to sign off on whether or not you're in compliance with, in some cases it's Sarbanes-Oxley and reporting of information. In other cases, it's HIPAA compliance with HIPAA standards. It's your business. If you have multinational compliance requirements across multinational boundaries, one size will not fit all for you. You may need to have data centers locally in European countries that don't share data outside those countries. You may need to have data centers across, say, countries across the U.S. that are distributed, and they can share data. You have different rules in different locations. Best bet is to have a solution that can work with you in that scenario. We can. Own your files, mitigate the risk, and then use our logging mechanisms to help you know where your data is at all times. So just to put a summary over it, and there have been a bunch of questions down the left side, and we're talking about for cloud file sync and services. Right? There's 6 things you got to think about, and this is by no means an exhaustive list. Of course, there's 100 more things we could talk about today, but it's about the hardware, who owns it, where does it exist? It's about the network, who has access to it, how do you grant control? It's about storage, who owns the data, and who owns the storage, and whether or not you own your files. User and admin administration, who oversees your users and ensures that your users are not accidentally or maliciously misbehaving. Integration with your existing infrastructure. Look, IT is smart. You guys have figured this out. Why reinvent the wheel? Regulatory requirements. Got to make sure you meet the regulatory requirements. And in the end, OwnCloud can help you address all of these challenges in a solution you completely control. And there have been a bunch of questions, so don't just take our word for it, of course. Head over to owncloud.com/download and grab the appliance, start playing with it, whatever you might like to do to work with it, or reach out to us, info@owncloud.com. I now know I think we have a few questions, so I'd like to open it up through the question portal. Just trying to see the question portal. Excellent. So do I need a high-end data center to install OwnCloud? OwnCloud is installable. I actually run it on a virtual machine running on a very old single-core Athlon XP for a few people at home. Very easy punch hole through my firewall. Piece of cake. I manage it myself for my own use. However, if you want it, depending on the scale, you really don't need a high-end data center. It'll run on standard x86 hardware. It'll run with standard direct attached or NAS or USB-based storage on the back end, server on Windows or Linux. Very straightforward to set up, and it does a good job of scaling. And depending on your needs, you can start with a single instance and then over time add a second one. Right? That's possible. And you can add a second instance of OwnCloud on the app server side and just round robin in and load balance across them and just add as you need. Recent performance tests suggest you can get up to or even more than on a relatively decent sized IBM blade, a single blade, not the whole chassis, but just a single blade, up to 10,000 users. So it will scale, but you also don't need to go that sophisticated. Can I encrypt OwnCloud data on a third-party cloud server to keep it private? You can, if you so choose. We do have an application-level encryption module that's shipped with OwnCloud. It uses ES256-based encryption, and what you do is you point your data to a third party, and you either mount it on the server you're using, or you can use our external storage app to mount this external storage. And you turn on the encryption module, and it encrypts with keys for each user, and then it also allows you to keep the files encrypted and allows people who have shared the files with you, or you share the files with somebody else, to unlock it using their private keys so that they can see your encrypted data when you share it with them. Can hear you loud and clear. Awesome, awesome. Are encryption keys under the control of admins or under the control of end users? There are actually options. Out of the box with OwnCloud, there's an option for an admin key or not. OwnCloud itself uses the OpenSSL key management capabilities, straightforward. The passphrase is something that's set by the user to access it, and it's the admin's choice whether or not there's an admin key used. That's out of the box. It's entirely possible for the encryption mechanisms to integrate with third-party encryption tools. It's not so out of the box because most of those are fairly custom, but it's an entirely possible scenario. Any remote wipe capabilities if a device is compromised? There's two answers to this. Yes, you can do forms of remote wipe, but true remote wipe with sandbox capabilities depends on a full MDM. And the MDM would typically provide a sandbox, or the MAM, mobile device management MDM, or mobile application management MAM, to create that sandbox and work within that. And we have several partnerships where that's something we can provide to help you wipe those remote files. What else have we got going? Let's see. Okay, so if you have OwnCloud deployed on Amazon, best practices. Okay. And so if you deploy an OwnCloud in Amazon, which we do ourselves, I have a bunch of test instances running out there. We run all over the place. It's from a LVM is an okay approach. Depending on how big you need to get, you could also do an S3 mount if you wanted to. And you can use the encryption application on a standard LVM encryption. That's fine. You can do disk level encryption, or you can use the encryption in the app, or both. The only thing I'd say is that resource hog, the application level and disk level encryption tends to be a bit heavy on CPU utilization because you're not doing encryption for every put and get. Let's see. What is the minimum RAM for a server image? Depends. It also depends on how big you want it to be. I run on 768 megabytes, but I wouldn't recommend it. But of course, for me, that's only 2 or 3 people sharing it in my house with some external access. You can run. I would prefer a few gigs to start. If you've got a virtual image, you can give it 2 or 4 gigs to start for a small number of users. Great, and then scale from there. Mobile Iron is in here. How would you integrate with Mobile Iron as an MDM? It's a matter of wrapping and combining OwnCloud and wrapping it for Mobile Iron, and then deploying it through the Mobile Iron, the apps through the Mobile Iron app stores out to the users. It's actually essentially not hard, and it's just something that is not quite out of the box because we want to make sure we wrap it appropriately for your scenario with Mobile Iron, and there's different options for them, but we set that up. It's part of a branding and theming package we can put together for you to make it available in Mobile Iron, and then it's just a matter of deploying it on Mobile Iron. Any recommendations for encrypting data on OwnCloud? Well, there's 2 ways. You could use our app for encrypting data on OwnCloud if you so choose. That's through the OwnCloud OpenSSL AES-256 encryption algorithm. You can do that. Or the other alternative is you could do something like a TrueCrypt or something like that is a volume-based encryption on the server. And depending on the use case that you're working with, your needs may be very different. And so one might work better than the other for you. And in a lot of cases, it's a good idea to give us a ring and just ask for a particular scenario, and we can help you figure out the best approach. Because there are options. Subscriber mode. Is there a way to set up a subscriber mode for online media? One of the things we haven't gone into in detail today is that we are an open source solution. We are based on the OwnCloud.org open source project. And in the OwnCloud.org community, folks have built an app an RSS reader app. With the end of Google Reader, they built a web-based, a server-based plugin, and then they've also built, the community's built apps for iOS, Android to consume the RSS feeds from the server. So the ability to, where'd it go? The subscriber mode for online media. One way would be an RSS feed like that. Another alternative might be a function we call keep in sync, where you set up a folder that's for online media, and somebody has a mobile device, and that every time that folder is updated, it's synced down to the mobile device automatically. That's possible. An easy way to create a custom client installer. There are ways to create custom client installers. Typically, an organization has a custom installer. And one of the things we do, there's two ways to do this. One of the things we do as a company is help customers take the standard OwnCloud and then brand it and theme it and deploy it out to customers. It's usually the actual amount of work is a couple of days. Usually takes about 2 weeks given the backlog of work we are in process. And if you're working with us, that's something we can discuss how to make that work for you and make it work for you easily. Selective Sync is available on the desktop already. To answer the question from about Selective Sync, it's available now. If you had it originally and you install over the top of that, it will be kept. However, Selective Sync on the desktop we switched to a similar sync all scenario if you're installing from scratch. Then you can manually set up the Selective Sync on your own, just like you used to be able to. Simply remove the directory syncing of everything and then start picking the subdirectories, and you'll be in business. If you migrate from an older version to the new version and you already had that in place, we will just use those settings. But if you're starting from scratch, the user experience of syncing everything seemed to be more in line with what the expectations of the end users were. But either one is configurable, and there are mechanisms you can use if you wish to set up and package something for deployment out to the customer or out to your users. You can package it and deploy it and set that up ahead of time. And we can tell you how to do that, so that essentially you can create Selective Sync for the entire organization. Is there a way to set? So there's always the question about apps that are a security of apps, and one of the elements of open source that's so beneficial is two things. One, we have a community, we have the code, and it's right there. Everybody can see it, everybody can look at it, and that's one of the arguments for open source software being as secure as it is. There's difficult if in an active community like ours to put something in that has to be reviewed 3 times. So we got 4 eyes before something's approved, plus the 2 of the original. So you got 6 eyes on the code before it gets folded back into OwnCloud. And in addition to the fact that it's open source and that happens, we also have security audits and security reviews on an ongoing basis to make sure we stay on top of the security vulnerabilities that often pop up in the app stacks we're working with. So the one question is, if owning and controlling your data and being able to reduce the amount of tracking and observation data that's flowing around out there about either your employees or about yourself is important to you, they're really, the question is almost, is it safe enough? Is it safe to not own it yourself? Technical, actually, one of these, I'm going to follow up with a few folks offline on some of the more technicals about how the keys are working. Lots of questions. SharePoint connectors are on the roadmap. We are planning on them in Q1 and 2 of this coming year. We currently have other connectors like Jive, if you guys know of Jive, that we've been working with, where you can connect OwnCloud into an existing infrastructure like Jive, use Jive as a data store, a repository of record, if you will, for data, and then access it through, access your files in Jive through OwnCloud on the web, on the mobile, and sync them to your desktop, and yet automatically have them put back into a conversation that you're having with users in Jive with the latest updates without having to manually find the file and upload it to the web interface. It extends that whole social experience out to the mobile device and apps of folks on the road. Encryption, yes, encryption absolutely affects performance, to answer that question, because as usual, your CPU is going bananas as it's trying to encrypt. There are ways in hardware acceleration and things you can do to reduce the impact, but there will be a notable impact in performance, really CPU utilization and thus time it takes to upload or download a file because of encryption in action. There are ways around that. If you do more hardware level encryption instead of using the app level encryption we have, it will be a little bit faster. But again, that's all about the configuration and the use case you have. Spanish language support, yes, absolutely. Language support for OwnCloud, I'm trying to think. I think we're over 65 languages translated, including Chinese and Japanese and well, the major languages. It's one of the bonuses of being an open source application, and our community does help us do the translations. And then we formalize and package some of those up. So we absolutely do have Spanish language support. Let's see, just keep scrolling down here as we get through more and more questions. High availability and replication. This is another one of those which I could go, it doesn't make a lot of sense to go into detail in OwnCloud itself. A lot of the high availability and replication it depends on the infrastructure that you're dropping OwnCloud into. So like we have a database and we have an app server and we have a file system that stores the files. And those are the three things that have to be kept in sync. The application server itself is easy. It's really more about keeping the config file in sync. The databases themselves is about replication, and there are many tools to do that. And the file system is about, there's many ways to do this, about either using a clustered file system or asynchronous replication or any number of other options to synchronize those two. So the interesting thing about HA, as it relates to file sync and share, is that the customer and the user always has the files on their desktop. So if a server is dropped and we have to reset you to a new server, the worst thing that happens is that you lose the upload you were working on. So that, out of the box, that's how OwnCloud works. So there's not even anything special required to make that happen. You can host multiple servers over a WAN, and there are options as to how to configure that. I'd say if you'd like, we can reach out to you and get some more details. I know we have a lot more detail to give on how to set up the infrastructure to properly replicate, and we can set that up for you. Feel free to reach out, info@owncloud.com, and we'll connect you and have that conversation. And I think, in general, we're getting to the bottom of our question list. We will make the slides available for download, and the webinar will also be something that can be reviewed after the fact, no problem. Let's see, filters between business and personal data. There actually are, and there's also some more. So let me talk about that quickly. You can set up OwnCloud. The mobile apps today have this capability, and the desktop apps will have this capability in the roadmap in the next few months. And it's the ability to have multiple OwnClouds on a single device. And typically, so what I do is I have my work OwnCloud, and I look at that. And then I also have my home OwnCloud on my mobile device. And so I switch between the two. But you can't cross-contaminate the data between the two using the OwnCloud app. You can look at one, do what you need to do, and then look at another and do what you need to do. From a desktop capability standpoint, what you'll have is separate sync directories. You'll have you can have a business one and a personal one there. And they can be syncing to two separate servers so that you have your one at home and you have your one at work. There are also other ways to do this because we do have the ability through external storage to mount at the admin's request. You can mount external storage like Dropbox or Google Drive. So there is the ability to mount that, but the admin gets to decide whether or not that should be mountable. And then that creates another, it looks like it's all in one physical location to the end user, but in reality, the data from Google Drive stays at Google Drive, and the data from Dropbox stays at Dropbox, even though it's consolidated in through a single interface. And your corporate data would sit alongside it, although not be cross-contaminated. And that gets me to the bottom of this list of questions. So, am I not scrolling at the end? Okay, hold on. Let me keep finding, let me keep looking for more questions. Oh, the email. Let me answer that again. It's info, I-N-F-O, info@owncloud.com. Or you can hit us up easily enough. Here we go. All right. Does OwnCloud index all the data on external devices? OwnCloud actually, it does create a short-term index of external device information, and it is cached. And if an external device is removed, so let's say you were working with, I don't know, Google Drive or something, or you had an external storage server attached, and that storage server became unavailable, the file cache would respond as if the files were there, so that you won't be, so those things won't be deleted from your desktop device. You just wouldn't be able to access what was in the server until that storage came back. Client-side encryption for files stored on your desktop, not at this time, although there is a roadmap around it, and we have been discussing the right time to make this happen. On the is the roadmap published question, we actually be happy to share it with folks. So we don't have it out there in the public, but although that does seem like a good conversation for a future webinar potentially, and we'd be happy to talk to you about it. So if you would like to reach out to info@owncloud.com, we'd be happy to share the roadmap with you as to where we're going. You can remove the indexing on the external devices. How do you deal with viruses? We do actually, we work with CLAM on the server, and there's two ways to handle it. When you upload a file to OwnCloud, if you turn on the app that does virus scanning, when that file is uploaded and it is received at the server, it is scanned, checked for a file, and checked for viruses. If those viruses are found, then there are two options. One is a notification option, the other one is a delete option, and that's up to the admin to set, and then that policy is applied to all the users. We will show the presentation. There are the beginnings of OwnCloud user groups, and we actually have quite a few, not in Chicago, though. So if there are folks, we'd be happy to reach out and have a conversation. If you'd like to get involved in some of the community work, of course, owncloud.org, and we can look at that as well. I can point you over there to get involved. The latest is we've actually resolved. There were early on in OwnCloud, so back early in the life of OwnCloud 5, we're now into the version 5.0.12, which is the latest OwnCloud release, and that solves many issues, bugs, security fixes along the way. And we have not had any of the recurring issues with the CLAM AV problems that there was a question asked about. I'm just scanning here the list of questions. Okay, so the ability to sync an OwnCloud repository between two data centers. We actually have customers doing that today, and they're doing it a number of different ways, but one of them that seems to be working is a GFS2 file system shared between the two data centers, replicating a clustered MySQL database replicating between the two data centers, and then a small farm of OwnCloud app servers running out front, load balanced, and essentially identically configured between the two data centers. So that is one way you can handle having two different data centers of OwnCloud running next to each other. And if you okay, we got selector sync desktop questions, at-risk encryption. Okay, what else? Anything else? Am I missing? Are there more? A small office has a take-home drive that should synchronize the data on the OwnCloud server. Yes. So what you can do with the OwnCloud desktop client is simply point the synchronization to that drive to the OwnCloud server, and it should replicate. It should synchronize between the two. So the answer is yeah, that should work. And coming up to 45 minutes, which I was hoping to keep us within. So given that my list of questions is running out, I think we're coming to a close. I want to say thanks to everybody for joining. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to info@owncloud.com. We'd also love to invite you to our next conversation, Data Security and the Dropbox Problem, which is really about a little bit deeper into some of the issues we talked about early on in this conversation around quote, the Dropbox problem. And I invite you to join us on October 17th. Thanks for the time. And with that, we will stop the recording and wrap up the conversation. Thanks, guys.